Hello. I would like to discuss in this video why I think that the Assassin rework is a failure, from my opinion. I will do my best to try to give constructive criticism as to why I think that it's a failure, and maybe some changes that can go forth. Um, Understand that I am making this video after almost a decade of kind of just frustration. So if I sound a little bit abrasive in this video, I apologize. That is not the intent. I'll do my best to be constructive. I have no ill will against any of the devs. I absolutely love the game that you have made, and I have more than enough faith that you will continue to improve and bring the game to a higher state of enjoyment for all players. A little bit of a background as to me as a player to hopefully let you understand where these criticisms are coming from and why um, the frustrations that I've had with this rework exist and uh, where the criticisms are coming from. Every league, I click Assassin. Um, I league start it, and my enjoyment of the league pretty much is solely based on how far I can take my character. I started playing around the 3.0 update. The exact timeline is fuzzy to me. There was only, I think, two leagues where I have not clicked Assassin. Or rather, I clicked Assassin and then clicked off of Assassin to make enough money so I could click Assassin again. And they were, I believe, Bestiary, where I had made a rarity find Pathfinder or Deadeye. I think it was Deadeye. And then a was another league, which was Delve, I believe, where I made a champion, and that was just so I could delve without dying and actually experience the content. Every league, I try to do as much content as I can. I try to experience all the content. I am a player who likes to play all content. Um, and on average, I have enough knowledge to be able to earn about maybe a mirror, sometimes two in a league. Usually takes me a month, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. Just kind of depends on the league, and what kind of state that the league is in, as well as the options you have. Most of my currency is generally earned from crafting. This league was a little bit rougher than most because of the Genesis tree. Um, I'm not going to give my opinion on the league. Uh, for the most part, I've enjoyed it. Um, but my complaints are not really that much different from the communities, and I think most people have said their piece on their complaints and concerns over the league, as well as what they enjoyed. Um, so let me discuss um, the issues that have arisen from going from 3.26 version of Assassin to 3.27. Um, and the reason I think this is a big deal is because a lot of changes have been made that have hurt Assassin more than they have helped. And so the first starting one is you have a loss of poison chance um, on, you know, toxic delivery uh, in the current ascendancy point, which was previously on Noxious Strike. Um, the poison chance has now been moved to these little nodes, which is fine. However, they only add up to 30, and you need to click on both nodes in order to get the full uh, poison chance, which means that if you are not clicking infused toxin, you have either the option to awkwardly click one node and give up a bigger node, um, or try to find poison chance elsewhere. Um, this is a problem that for a reason which is gearing, and I will discuss that in more in depth later. Um, the other issue is that there is a loss of a lot of crit chance and crit multi-scaling on these nodes. In 3.26, Toxic Delivery had a 0.5% chance to crit per poison affecting the enemy, up to 2%. That is now removed. Um, there was also another node, which was Deadly Infusion, right? Which has also been removed. That gave you 5% to your crit multi per power charge, as well as a 1.5 critical strike chance while at maximum power charges. Um, in terms of the little nodes, as far as I'm aware, for the most part, um, they've been unchanged outside of this one. Before it used to give you damage multiplier for dots. Um, but since the poison chance has been removed, it's been put there. And then obviously we get the increased duration now. This is an issue because it makes scaling Assassin a little bit more rough. Um, again, this comes into like gearing issues, which I'll try to discuss more in depth at a later point in the video. But just note that this is, in my opinion, a downgrade from the previous Ascendancy. The other issue is that opportunistic as a defensive layer is less viable now, or rather, the opportunity cost to get this defensive layer, which already is kind of a bit rough of a defensive layer because damage from critical strikes cannot be reflected, is kind of a conditional um, defensive layer. And the reason for that is because there's content in the game where your chance to crit can be basically completely taken away from you, which means that you will no longer be reflect immune as soon as you decide to take this node. Um, this has gotten a buff in terms of the numbers. The 25% more damage is nice. The 35% less damage taken is nice. However, this now comes at a cost of where you have to click 4 of your ascendancy points rather than previously, which was 2. Uh, and on top of that, prior to this, we have the new assassination styles. We have, for the jugular as well as knife in the back, which you can take through the Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Jewel combo. But this, in my opinion, is also problematic because in order to get the full benefit of either of the assassination styles, so to basically always have that crit chance up, to always have the crit multiplier up, you have to allocate your Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame slot to this in order to fully benefit from it. Which means that if you wanted to click this, you would have to click one of these and use your Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame slot to receive the full benefits of clicking these 4 nodes compared to leaving out the Forbidden Flame, Flesh slots for something else and losing out on either crit chance or multiplier. And that's incredibly frustrating because it locks you in to basically saying, if I want to click on this node, I must click on the forbidden, or I must get the forbidden flame, forbidden flesh set up in order to fully utilize this node. You may not view it that way. You might view it differently. You might find that the numbers are pointing in a different direction. For me as a player, I find this incredibly frustrating. Um, the Scion Ascendancy has a similar setup, I think, but the difference with that one is that one, when you click on the Scion Ascendancy, you get to start at the center of the tree. You also get additional skill points that you can spend on the tree to help, and you also get to start anywhere on the tree. So, having to use maybe your Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh setup to get uh, two of the witches' ascendancies, or to get a portion of two of the duelist ascendancies, is less of a downside um, because it's balanced out by the benefits that the ascendancy gives. In the assassin ascendancy, it just feels like a flat downside because so much of what the assassin does in its current state is extremely limited to um, conditional requirements. And it's not like this is the first time you have done this either. When Assassin was initially released, um, there were there was a version of this, and that was Ambush and Assassinate, I believe, which were then later combined into Ambush and Assassinate from the previous 3.26 Ascendancy. Um, when you compare it, those in order to get both Ambush and Assassinate in the original version of the Assassin rework or release, my bad, um, you had to click 4 points to get the full benefit. However, you could technically stop at, um, I want to say it was Ambush first, and then Assassinate was the next one, and then Assassinate would give you Culling Strike, while Ambush would give you nothing. So it would be a total of 4 clicks in order to get full benefits. Eventually, this was combined into Ambush and Assassinate, and you got the full benefits just from the 2 clicks that you would normally do for the Ascendancy. Um, this was beneficial because even though a lot of the benefits were conditional, they were given to you all in one node, which meant that even though they were conditionally applying it, you clicking on the ascendancy was giving you all of the conditional benefits, not just one or two. Or rather, you didn't have to pick between them, they were just given to you. Um, the other issue that has arise again from uh, the change from the ascendancy is Deathmark. This does nothing. It provides no benefit to Assassin. It not only is it locked behind 4 points, you're almost never clicking this. There's never a point in time where you're sitting there going, I want to have a level 30 Assassin's mark that conditionally only applies to rare and unique enemies. And I'm pretty sure this also takes up your curse slot, which means that you would have to invest into getting more curse options in order to use other curses like Despair or something like Frostbite. Um, the marked enemies can't evade attacks, also another conditional buff that would never come up because it's not difficult to get cannot evade attacks. You'll get it on your weapon if you need it or through some other means. Um, but it also conditionally only applies to rare unique enemies, which means that if you aren't fully spec'd into the accuracy that is required to always hit, um, you're going to be lacking in uh, that buff from your ascendancy against just regular packs of mobs, um, which is not the best. And I don't think even in any of the attempted builds that I've seen uh, thrown around this league at anyone has ever clicked this. Um, at the end of the day, like I'm trying to think of any sort of uh, point where you would click Assassin's Mark, but it just doesn't feel like you would do it. At level 30, I believe it gives you like around 59% crit multi, um, which is very low. It's almost an insignificant amount when you compare it to getting maybe a reflected amulet or reflected rings or even non-reflected rings if you're just stacking two of them plus the amulet or getting crit multi from other sources. The power charge generation also is kind of irrelevant um, because you already have power charge generation from unstable infusion, and the power charge generation from unstable infusion is a bit more reliable than using the assassin's mark. And there are other sources of getting power charge generation, either through, power charge on critical gem support or some other method that you may have. Um, this doesn't benefit you, I think, in boss fights either. It doesn't keep your uptime um, any different. Again, you could debuff the boss with a different curse or hex, and that would probably be more impactful than marking them with Assassin's Mark. So, unless the function of Assassin's Mark changes, I don't believe that this is ever going to be impactful or useful. And the fact that it's locked behind 4 points is kind of ridiculous. The other issues with this Ascendancy rework, and this is kind of straying away from the downsides of the Assassin rework from 3.26, and this is just the issues that Assassin has had from the very beginning, effectively, is Assassin has no defenses. The Mistwalker is not a real defensive layer. Elusive is not a defensive layer. Elusive it is losing effectiveness as it over time, which creates an entropy effect, which means that you will be hit. And the problem with Assassin is that because you will be hit, you're weak to one shots, and your positioning on the tree prevents you from getting good damage mitigation um, reliably. Now, the benefit of elusive is that you get to go fast, you incredibly fast. Um, However, you have no way to refresh it in any way, shape, or form until it reaches 0. Now, this changes with things like the anoint for incorporeal, I believe, which is the opportunity cost of your anoint, and then the Oshabi ascendancy, which feels like an insult because it came out at the same time as the assassin rework, and it could have literally replaced Blood and Shadow as a node, and that would probably have been more impactful than having it on a secondary, unrelated almost ascendancy that you can't access until you've killed Oshabi inside the Sacred Grove. Um, And Blood and Shadowed, it enables Golden Rule. This is also not a real defensive layer. 40% recoup, which is limited only to physical damage, and only limited to life effectively, is not a real defensive layer. Again, your problems are one shots, so big fizz hits and stuff like that. If you're being hit, there's a high likelihood that you're going to take 40% of that hit and die anyways, which means that the recoup will never apply. Um, Even on some of the tankier assassin builds that you will see, these are like usually 2 or 3 mirror investments, cast on crit builds, um, or some other, similar high gear investment builds. Their max hit, usually I don't think I've ever seen it go above maybe 40,000, which is acceptable, but it's not enough to protect you from being one shot. And most of the time, that number is closer to around 26 to 30k of max hit. It just isn't impactful. And then if you want to pair this with other recoup nodes, you have this one here, which is easily accessible. This one's relatively easily accessible as well. But then you have this one where you have to kind of stretch all the way to get to. And if you're going a golden rule build, you want to be on this side of the tree more so. Because you need to get access to both bleed and poison. Um, and it just doesn't function in a meaningful way. Um, it's kind of disappointing to see that, we're trying to tie the assassin into uniques that don't really do anything. To be honest with you, I don't think there's a single golden rule build that I've seen in recent time that has functionally been useful. I mean, getting some increased armor, which again, no armor nodes on this side of the tree, unless you go all the way down here and then you get access to some armor evasion nodes. Eh, which means you would have to get your armor through gear, which ends up increasing the cost of your build, um, to try to allocate that. And then to get chaos resistance per poison that's on you, it also is kind of a bit weird because you're probably going to cap your chaos res through your gear or through nodes on the tree that are easily accessible to you. Um, like even here, you get like 17%. Um, and so it's a little bit awkward as to for me to understand as to why this is a thing. This does have some benefit, which is you're unaffected by damaging ailments, but this only protects you from bleeding, ignite, and poison. And ignite is usually a non-factor because you will be pairing it with something like the Storm Shroud Jewel, which is just getting modifiers to avoid being shocked, apply to all elemental ailments. Um, and you'll probably be getting that through your flask or maybe your boots, or some other form on your gear. And this isn't enough of a reduction in opportunity cost that it justifies it existing. Now, if this was a bit different, um, as in it applied to all damage over time, and let's say instead of the golden rule, or rather, let's say instead of saying unaffected by damaging ailments, it said damage over time effects on you instead of damaging you, heal you. That means you could poison and bleed yourself, and you would gain or give you life regen equal to like X amount of damage that they're doing or whatever. Um, you could enable Golden Rule in the way that you wanted, and it would also be an actual defensive layer that people would be willing to click more often. And the reasoning for that would be it would allow you to basically mitigate some of the issues that uh, affect a lot of builds, which is damage over time. It is extremely hard to get any sort of like defensive layers for damage over time outside of the Shade and some, I think, uniques like Tainted Pact, I believe, and obviously the Ascendancy that gives you some damage over time uh, mitigation. So this would make things like maybe Corrupted Blood or other, you know, exclusive boss exclusive dots or ground effects that are uh, problematic, like Burning Ground or whatever. And it would give you a node that gives you some immunity to that, and it could take away the need to gear in um, something to deal with that, right? And in higher level content, or even lower level content. So that could I could see that being an option for this. I'm not too upset by the unaffected by damaging ailments parts of this. It's mostly just the recoup doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have any synergy with what Assassin is trying to do. And it just feels like there's a lot of anti synergy just built into the location of where Assassin is on the tree. For example, let's say you want to stack a bunch of crit multi. Well, then you can click Perfect Agony, but then you run into the issue of you need to get Poison Chance, and a lot of these Poison Chance nodes uh, have something that is basically a wasted stat on you. So this one could give you 10% Chaos Res, which isn't too terrible. But then the 10% of damage multiplier for poison is not affected because it's being replaced with Perfect Agony. They there is some there's literally one node for crit and ailment damage over time multiplier for ailments, and this singular node is not enough to justify clicking on toxic delivery. Um, it's very weird as to like why this also was not changed with the ascendancy. I know some people have already stated this, but my opinion doesn't differ too much from that. If this simply said that, your damage over time multiplier for ailments is equal to your crit strike multiplier, and your critical strike chance is equal to your poison chance, then now, this all of a sudden becomes a more viable combination and worth having a conversation around because now clicking toxic delivery makes more sense, right? You're getting the flat more damage and duration, and even though you don't have the crit multi-scaling, which would then push this into a territory of where this is just kind of existing um to a higher level where this is actually viable and a good way to scale your damage. Um and I think that's what would have to be the change that happens here. Or we would have to just say a different solution, which would be either adding back the crit multi and adding back the poison chance onto toxic delivery. Um, There's another issue, which is with infused toxin. Infused toxin actually isn't that impressive of a a node to where I would say that it is worth clicking on, because there's going to be a lot of builds where you're going to want to stop at toxic delivery, which means if you do not want to click on infused toxin, you're missing out on 15% poison chance, which is already reduced from the previous 40. So you can have only a max of 30, so you're already down 10, and then you'll be already down another 15, which means that you have to try and make up, um, either make do with the only 15% chance that you get, or try to make it up in some other way, which will eat into your defensive layers because that will have to come from your gear most likely, or through jewels, which can provide you defensive layers on their own accord. Um, there's also other sources to get all damage from hits can poison, um, like the pneumatic dagger that you get from Heist, festering resentment, which is the new dagger that came out, um, beacon of madness, which now has synergy with the new delirium ascendancy. There's also inextricable faith, which is from Elder, I believe. Fairly common drop, dirt cheap. Um, and on top of not only giving you the stat, they also provide you secondary effects that are like extremely beneficial to you. Um, in the case of, festering resentment, you get spell damage, spell block, some other good stats, and it gives you basically a free trigger, um, or a free ability to trigger spells, right? With the pneumatic dagger, you can craft on it, so it's basically a rare that gives you this ascendancy, which means you can have whatever stats you need that you may be missing, like the hits can't be evaded. Um, you get access to inextricable faith, which I believe makes you crit immune. Or something similar. Like you take reduced damage from crits from enemies that have like vines on them. I'm not too sure about that. And regardless, it's still also giving you some other stats. Now, these do take up item slots, which for Assassin is very rough because, again, all your defenses has to either come from the physical tree because there's none in your ascendancy, or they have to come from gear, which is incredibly expensive and then takes up opportunity costs of other stuff such as your damage scaling. So an example of that would be like if you clicked perfect agony, right? You need a bunch of crit multi. Well, if you stop to get crit multi on all your gear, it's going to take up a slot which could have been either resistances or, some other sort of like fizz damage reduction, spell suppression, or something else. Um, which is incredibly rough for the ascendancy, I would say. Um, there's also little things that cause conflict. So, like for instance, if you wanted to scale elusive to try to make better use of it, since you already have it on your ascendancy, um, even if you were not using it for the defensive aspect of it, let's say you just wanted the speed, um, you have to use Nightblade, which only affects attacks. So you cannot pair this with any sort of spell build with Assassin, which takes a lot of the mines and traps out of the equation. Not that they were in the equation, because your elusive cannot trigger from this, which means if you try to access these nodes, which are pretty powerful, and give you a lot of uh, early game power, and sometimes even late game if you're deciding to one shot bosses or whatever. But even then, you're giving up on defenses in order to do that. But they don't. The elusive does not trigger whenever your mines critically strike or your traps critically strike. So that avoids an entire aspect of that. Um, but in order for you to fully benefit from it, you have to also get claw mastery, which means that you're either going to have to dual wield both a dagger and a claw, which you're probably not doing. Um, you also have to path and try to get, these nodes, which means if you're just scaling elusive by itself and you're not using a dagger, you're literally losing out on um 3 points worth of like stats that you could have been spent elsewhere. Same thing with this. If you were, let's say, using only the daggers for the benefit that Adder's Touch gives you, which is um, critical strikes with daggers poison the enemy, which would fix your poison chance issue. But then now, in order to fully utilize the benefit of claw, you would have to take claw nodes that you weren't going to use. It's just awkward. Um, and it feels doable, but it's in the way that it's done. Um, it leads to a lot of just points of frustration that cause issues within the build. Um, because on top of having to path to these nodes and try to get the full benefit out of Mistwalker, if and Nightblade, if you're going that route, you have to do little things which can be a bit awkward. And if, let's say, you are going the poison version of, all of that, you can just grab a pneumatic dagger and then infuse toxins is now a wasted stat, which means you get to basically miss out on this node here. Uh, so it's a little bit awkward in terms of like how it's done. Um, the other node which has been added, which I'm not saying that infused toxins is a bad point. I think just infused toxins by itself is not enough. There needs to be an addition of something on top of infused toxins, because if you're just locked into daggers to try to get the perfect poison chance, you're missing out on other aspects that could be, and it's a bit too restrictive in that regard. The other one is mystical infusion. Base spell crit chance is equal to main hand weapon. Um, if this was last league, this would be a godsend. If this, because of the changes that happened this league, it's a little bit one of those weird awkward scenarios, because in order for you to click on this node, you need to click on this node, which means that you're trying to stack power charges um, and go on this side of the tree. But in order for you to stack power charges easily, you can't use rune daggers, because rune daggers, or claws for that example, but rune daggers because they have a bunch of spell modifiers on them. You can't click on those because they don't have the ability to get power charge either through synth as far as I'm aware, or through any sort of influence mods like some other weapon types have. Obviously, wands have void batteries. You can get power charges that way. And then I believe staves can get +2 power charges as well. Um, You could, I think, get the two power charges from the shield, but uh, the power charge shield, but I think that also causes a different set of issues, which you would have to solve for afterwards. Uh, Another issue is that poison weirdly doesn't have that much that scales with power charge. So let's say you do toxic delivery, and then you're like, okay, I'm not taking infused toxins because I'm using something that's giving me the ability to, either always poison or some other thing, right? Like maybe you're taking Adder's Touch, or maybe you've decided to do like Cobra Lash or something that already can inflict poison, so you don't need the ability to have all damage inflict poison. Um, and you have decided to uh, use something like Venomous Toxin or Malagaro's Cruelty or something like that. If you're trying to scale both power charges and frenzy charges, it's a little bit awkward because you can get this node here, right, which will give you both. You might be able to work your way up here, and you might choose to work your way over here. But if you want to get, let's say, three of these, and you'd have to go all the way down here, which doesn't necessarily hurt you, but then you're limiting yourself to the power charge as well. And then if you want to go more of the power charge route with venomous toxins, you have to go all the way over here to grab the third one, um, which is a little bit awkward as far as like stretching the tree. Obviously, you can take Badge of the Brotherhood, and you can just stack the power charges, and then now your frenzy charges are now equal to your power charges. However, but then you don't get to use Malagaro's Cruelty. You'll be able to benefit from like Snake Bite, but then you can't use Snake Bite plus Venomous Toxins together, which, again, another build limitation. Uh, this stuff is not as big of a deal compared to some of the other issues in the Ascendancy, like, you know, enabling a unique jewel that doesn't have that much of an impact, taking up your Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh slots due to opportunity cost, lack of poison resistance, just lack of scaling with power charges, having basically what is effectively a dead node, Mistwalker not being an actual defensive layer. Uh, these things I think are a bit more impactful comparatively. Um, Trying to think if there's any other thing as far as the tree and the anti synergy with like the ascendancy exists. I don't think I can think of any, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Which is to really kind of the opportunity cost of clicking assassin. So when you compare it within its ascendancy, so ignoring all other ascendancies that exist, just clicking within the shadow ascendancy, uh, you have the option to go either trickster or sabo. Um, if you click on trickster, you get a insane amount of defenses, right? Because every single little node on trickster, basically one of these nodes, the tiny ones, they have energy shield and evasion scaling, I believe, um, on every single one. And right now, from the previous ascendancy, this is kind of like a good thing, an improvement, if you will, to the current ascendancy, which is you get the 4% increased max life. That's great. but this is the only source of it. There's no other source that gives you the increased max life. But if you look at the uh, Trickster Ascendancy, I don't think there's a single one that doesn't have that. Um, on top of clicking Trickster, you get insane amounts of generic energy shield leech, uh, which is fine because of your proximity to chaos inoculation. You're probably going to be clicking this anyways. Or even if you do not click it, chaos inoculation, you have access to Eldritch Battery, so you can use it as like a mana source. And then if you for some reason wanted more leech, you have access to this node here, this node up here, as well as Ghost Reaver, um, which is kind of crazy, uh, as to like how the how just how much benefits that the ascendancy gets, because like not only on top of that you get unconditional damage reduction options from something like Heartstopper. um you can get action speed immunity from like one step ahead, as well as like an action speed reduction aura. um so not only are you immune to having your action speed reduced past a certain point, you also reduce the enemy's action speed as well, which is incredibly useful and pretty insane defensive layer. Um, you get access to spell suppression just on the ascendancy. It's conditional, but it doesn't conflict with anything else inside of your ascendancy or anything that you want to, because you also get an insane amount of leech, which means that you can conditionally stay at full ES more so compared than other ascendancies that may not necessarily have that level of leech for energy shield. And on top of that, every single time you suppress spell damage, you have a chance to restart your energy shield, and then you have easy access to these suppress nodes, which will recover your energy shield, as well as give you an increased recharge rate, which then you can pair with Wicked Ward, counteracting the downsides of Wicked Ward and also um, getting all the benefits uh, from just a four ascendancy point nodes, and like a few points on the tree, right? And most of the points on both Sabo and Trickster are accessible within two, right? I believe each of them only have two abilities that require 4 points. For Trickster, I believe it's Soul Drinker and Spellbreaker. And then for Sabo, I believe it's Pyromaniac and Calculated Risk. Um, while, if you look at the Assassin Ascendancy, you have Deathmark, Mystical Infusion, and Infused Toxins, and Opportunistic locked behind 4 points, um, which seems incredibly unusual as to like, and that's completely ignoring the fact that Deathmark is kind of redundant, but it just feels very awkward when there's so many things that are locked behind 4 points, but you have the other two ascendancies within the archetype of Shadow that just get to freely click on their abilities with a lot less limited opportunity cost. And you might say it's like a bit unfair to compare to Trickster because Trickster is just like defensively insane, um, which is true. Uh, and but even when you compare it to the less popular and more niche like Sabo, um, Sabo gets free blind immunity from Born in the Shadow, um, gets a free blind aura from Born in the Shadows, and damage reduction from Born in the Shadows. That's a single node that he's clicking. Um, he gets a hinder aura, I believe, from Demolition Specialist, uh, with the conditions of mines, right? And then also the increased like effect of it as well. And then like Clockwork also gives you like cooldown recovery rate, and then he has a conditional 50% less damage taken 30% of the time just from Bomb Specialist. Um, on top of that, he gets access to some incredibly insane po- uh, uh he gets access to some incredibly insane um ascendancy nodes like Perfect Crime and like Clockwork or Shrapnel Specialist, um, which effectively is more triggers, uh, cooldown recovery rate, which is incredibly difficult to get, um, and Shrapnel Specialist, which is a free Nimbus, all within 2 clicks. So only 2 ascendancy points to reach any of those. While in order for um, Assassin to do anything similar, he has to click 4 points every time. Or even, just to get a benefit from uh, assassination style, you also have to give your Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh slot as well. Uh, it seems very awkward as to, the point efficiency when you compare it. And then because your Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh slot are basically being used, it's more effective for you to click on either Sabo or Trickster and then click Infused Toxins through the Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame, or Mystical Infusion through Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame. Or honestly, even something like Unstable Infusion, Opportunistic, or Mistwalker. Uh, they will be significantly better utilized on ascendancy that isn't assassin within the shadow class, and that's just the opportunity cost within the shadow class on its own, right? This is not including the opportunity costs of the other ascendancies that exist, um, of which there's two I would like to bring up, right? I think that these two ascendancies have probably the most build overlap with Assassin, as well as like proximity to where they are on the tree. So one is Witch, specifically Occultist, and the other is Ranger, specifically Pathfinder. Um, if you compare the popular builds on Assassin, other than the boss killing ones, which are 0 HP builds, and they're not gonna do maps. Their job is to go into a boss fight, one phase the boss, and then hope they don't die. Um, uh, a popular build on, or build archetype, I should say, for Path of Exile has been cast on crit Cyclone, and most of the time when you're clicking or trying to do cast on crit uh, Cyclone, you can click the Assassin Ascendancy. I did it last league. Um, However, you don't get access to some of the benefits that you would get on that Ascendancy. Um, so an example is that a cultist gets access to Explode, gets access to Cold and Chaos Resistance Reduction Aura, gets access to free Chaos Res, right? Just like a 60 plus 60 Chaos Res. So you get to start at 0 compared to everyone else's negative 60. Um, you get the Wither and Hinder aura that comes along with it, or you get either the ability to cannot be chilled, or the ability to also have a chill and freeze aura around you. Um, you get access to Energy Shield, regen, uh, as well as stun immunity while you have Energy Shield. And then not only do you have that, you can also scale your energy shield higher by increasing your chance to block spell damage. And then on top of that, you also have access to the +1 maximum charges. You have a form of charge generation in there, which is just using your ability. So as long as you spend 200 mana, you'll gain power charges, and the faster you can spend 200 mana, the faster you stack power charges. Um, but on top of that, you get increased damage per power charge and increased area of effect per power charge. Along with, again, the ability to explode from Profane Bloom or even Unholy Authority, which allows you to have the additional curse and get past curse proof enemies. While the Assassin gets power charge generation, uh, uh, which is of a measly 15% on crit and 30% off crit, which punishes you for capping out your critical strike chance in a sense. Um, I'm not too upset by that. It's low hanging fruit in my opinion. There's like bigger fish to fry with the ascendancy, but you don't have any scaling that comes along with it. So now not only is your choice between the two ascendancies, right? If you're trying to scale spells with assassin specifically, not only do you not have any way to scale the spells per power charge if you choose to stack power charges, you also just don't have any of the benefits that also come with the rest of the ascendancy for the build archetypes that are used with the assassin ascendancy, um, like Cosprey's Malice, cast on crit, or just regular Forbidden Right cast on crit. And I also believe Cosprey's Malice is a sword, so you don't even benefit from mystical infusion because the main hand weapon that you have um, doesn't isn't one that naturally has a high crit chance. So when you compare that to, maybe Soul Rend or Forbidden Right, it doesn't actually provide you that much of a crit benefit. And then if we look at like what your access to spell crit is, uh, you have these nodes which are super easy to access for you as an assassin, but then you have to stretch your tree all the way over here to try to get these spell crit nodes. And even then, that may not be enough, and you might have to come down here. Um, which is a little bit more easier to access compared to the other ones. But if you compare that to how easy it is to access for Forbidden Right Occultists, it's significantly less of a hassle comparatively. Um, the only benefit I think I could think of that Assassin would provide to a cast on crit build is just having the Mistwalker to give you the extra movement speed, so you're not limited by the movement speed of Cyclone. And that would be really the only reason you even click on it. And that in itself is kind of a waste because you could just get movement speed from a flask or through some other gear, like on your boots or whatever. And you would be getting if like crit boots that would let you have that would let you get elusive, right? Through the elevated influence mods from the influence exalted orbs. Um and so if you're trying to scale spells or trying to go into like Forbidden Right, cast on crit, there's and let's say you're not married to this class like I am, you would just click for the witch every time. There would be zero reason for you to ever even consider assassin. Um, the other issue, which is Pathfinder. if you look at where Assassin is, right, you get toxic delivery, which provides you effectively nothing. It just says that if you crit, you do more damage and you get some more poison duration per crit that you get. But then when you compare that to like Pathfinder, um, you get the big reason why almost every poison build is a Pathfinder: poison proliferation, and you get access to Wither, which is something that I forgot. So not only does like the occultist ascendancy get access to all of that, it also gets access to Wither, um, which is something that the assassin ascendancy just doesn't have access to at all. Which means that you have to try to get it through either a Wither support gem, which only works on attacks, or you have to try to get it through some other source like Unholy Might on a cluster jewel, um, which can not always be an option. Uh, but back to Pathfinder, you you get access to poison proliferation. You get access to Wither. You get access to uh like 250% increased crit chance and Fizz as extra chaos because of the flask ascendancies. And the entire ascendancy is basically a mage blood. Um so you have pretty solid defensive layers, and then on top of that, your Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh jewels will grant you access to, you know, other layers that you could take. Whether you wanted to take like endless munitions for the extra projectiles, or uh, Mother's Teaching for bark skin. Um, and that is the exact same with a cultist and the witch area, because not only does every little node have energy shield on your ascendancy, and then on the Pathfinder every little node has, I think, like increased flask effect, and then you get like a little other bonus, which is like poison duration or chaos damage, etc., which will affect your poison, so increasing the scaling of your poison. You, as an occultist, get access to 9 lives, which gives you recoup for both life, mana, and energy shield. And then I believe Fury of Nature lets you have uh, elemental ailments also proliferate, which means if you were doing like a poison hex blast of contradiction build or something similar, or was it Havoc? I don't remember which one it is. The one that allows your chaos damage to inflict elemental ailments. If you were doing a build with that, you have a lot more options. And not only that, you are also closer to a lot of the poison chance nodes and the damage over time nodes for poison, as well as having the ability to get tinctures to also apply to your range skills. Um, and majority of the time, if you try to search up a poison build, they're not clicking assassin, they're clicking Pathfinder. And that's because Pathfinder just has everything that Assassin would ever want if Assassin was to continue having the identity of being, a poison, uh, an ascendancy that you want to click if you're intending to use poison, and it just it just doesn't bode well for Assassin because you're just missing so much. You can get Poison Prolif through something like Benos. Benos is a tier 0 unique, and you're not going to have access to that from the very beginning. So not only do you have to earn your way up to a Benos, you have to try to get enough currency to get a Benos, or have it drop for you if you're playing solo self-found. And then once you have the Benos, it's taking up your slot for your weapon, which means that you are missing an opportunity to use a different weapon that could provide you a better benefit, like, again, the new Festering Resentment or a pneumatic dagger. Um, or even like the Cost Breeds Malice, if you were doing a cast on crit poison build, which is an archetype that just fundamentally is not possible on Assassin, but it is possible on other ascendancies if they choose to go that route. Um, these opportunity costs are just a little bit awkward. And that's not even including like other ascendancies and like kind of the benefits that they get, right? If you go Slayer, you can stack both frenzy charges, endurance charges, and then you can stack it with Badge of the Brotherhood to get like triple um charge duration stacking, which means that if you were to go a build similar to mine, even though you would have like the opportunity cost of like having to climb all the way up here to get all your power charges, you would get pretty much maximum benefit from it, uh, and probably be doing significantly higher DPS than I am currently. Um, Not to say that that's what anyone is doing currently with this ascendancy. There's like better options with like the new jewel text to for life stacking and whatnot. Um, or even block. And so these opportunity costs are extremely weird as to why, like, other classes are allowed to have it, even within like assassins or shadow's own class choices, why they're allowed to, have little things like, hey, what if assassin, on top of having, what it already has, you just added a 5%, or 4% increased max life to every node, little node. What if you made, opportunistic only a 2 node? What if you just combine the two, as ambush and assassinate was, and just give them the increased crit chance and the increased crit multi, along with the culling strike, uh, so they can use their forbidden flesh, forbidden flame for other options. What if you reworked Assassin's Mark to be more valuable to assassin, or made it so uh, the mark skill has no effect and is an unconditional, culling strike, where it just says if your hit was a crit, the enemy cannot evade, right? Or if the hit will be crit, the enemy cannot evade, or something simple like increases and reductions to your crit chance are applied to accuracy, or increases and reductions to crit chance are applied to poison chance and poison duration and whatnot. Uh, so like little things like that could, you know, make this class more usable, um, and even less problematic in terms of, uh, the efficiency of a player coming into the game going, hey, I would like to play assassin, and then going, ah, yes, I have to do weird, awkward things to try to make the build function, and in order to get the gear to be at a place where it can be competitive, I have to spend close to maybe a mirror, maybe even two, to get it to do things that maybe other builds can do at a significantly cheaper budget, maybe uh closer to like half a mirror or something like that. Um, uh, and it's just a little bit frustrating to see that this is kind of the state that Assassin is in. Um, because I do genuinely love it. I genuinely not only love this game, but I absolutely love this class. Uh, I think it looks cool. It's sick. Um, but it's having a bit of an identity crisis because it's trying to do too many things that are contradictory to what it needs. And Partially that's because of its location on the tree, partially that's because of the lack of defensive layers, meaning that your gear investment has to be higher. Partially this is due to like opportunity costs that other classes have. And these little things have just kind of added up over the years as, the game changes around Assassin, but Assassin doesn't get to change. Um, And I understand that there's a bit of a balance nightmare because of the trickster ascendancy. It just kind of overshadows all other ascendancies in the region. It's also why like spell suppression had to be nerfed because it was too strong on trickster, right? And I understand that you want to be maybe safe for assassin, but I believe you can have a build that is, or a version of assassin that is thematically holistic, for starters, and not um awkward to try to make work. Um, his identity could be just critical strikes. Everything scales with crit. Your chance to poison scales with crit. Your crit multiplier scales with your crit multi. Um, your let's say you change this node to where it says that your spell um crit chance is increased by your or the base spell crit chance is increased by the increases and reductions to crit chance, like global crit chance, um, would be significantly better than something like this. Or you could, just change daggers to have power charges, so it makes sense to stack power charges as well as use the dagger to get the maximum benefit off of the spell crit. Um, you could say instead of worrying about the enemies being on low life, you could say, hey, the assassin is going to be a low life build. There's plenty of options for low life builds that allow them to become competitively tanky compared to the rest of the classes without like being insanely crazy like chieftain or gladiator. Um, who get access to things like a free melding of the flesh or lucky block, which is already an insane defensive layer. um you could say thematically that hey, this the shadow ascendancy is a every almost every single one, I think, outside of like Sabo, it has multiple weapons in their hands. So like you know the the assassin could be the ascendancy that dual wields, and then assassin can use uh this node right here, which gives you chance to block spell and attack damage while dual wielding, as well as attack speed and cast speed. um and so you could say, hey, your increases and reductions to crit chance also apply to your chance to block, um or uh, per power charge, you also increase your chance to um, block, or while you're on low life, you get X amount of block and spell block, right? Um, and then you could utilize it with this, which would give you, like, let's say, the other dual wielding benefits. Um, there's also other nodes, I believe, like 10% chance to suppress spell damage for each dagger you're wielding. So if you're wielding two, it makes capping out your spell suppression a little bit easier. Um, there could be other things like increases and reductions to uh, crit chance, or apply to maybe your evasion rating, make it easier to hit the 95 cap on evasion rating. Um, maybe, you could give him some other defensive options, like chevrons, for example. You could say, hey, not only are you a low life build, but you know, your chaos damage doesn't bypass energy shield. And so you can be a low life build that doesn't have to spec into Coralitos, or doesn't have to spec into Ivory Tower, or doesn't have to use a chevrons. Um, and you can get the benefit of, like, going low life and having some of the tankiness that comes from Progenesis and Petrified Blood, um, and access to nodes like Pain Attunement and whatnot, um, while still keeping the thematic fantasy of an assassin, which is, hey, you're not like a super giga tank, but you get to go in, you kill your target, and then you leave. So you get to be incredibly fast or whatever. And I'm not saying that he needs to have like an effective HP of like 400k or whatever, but something reasonable to where like you're not being one shot by basic mobs in, T16s, T16.5s, or and T17s even, without like, hundreds of divines in investment, would be a lot more uh would make him a lot more viable. And let's say you say, okay, we actually like having assassin get all of his, defenses from his gear. Fine. That's okay. That's acceptable. Um Give him other uses that, provide him benefits, right? Like maybe, this again, as I stated earlier, maybe the unaffected by damaging and ailments just says, while you're going back to the low life thing, while you're on low life, hey, damaging ailments heal you, they don't hurt you. Or, while you're if you've dealt a critical strike in the past, whatever, damaging ailments heal you, they don't do damage to you. um uh Unholy Might, right? Giving the ascendancy access to Unholy Might. Hey, all your physical damages you know converted to chaos, and you also get Wither. So you'll have, access to Wither that the other two ascendancies that you're essentially competing with build wise have, as well as, some built-in damage conversion to convert physical to chaos. You could give conditional explode, right? So hey, well, if you kill an enemy that's poisoned, they will explode to deal, a quarter of their HP, and it can be uh, worse or the same as Profane Bloom. Um, if you wanted to, this would help with a lot of the clear issues, right? Because like one of the issues with map clearing with the poison assassin build is the lack of proliferation. Um, and so now you don't need prolif because they explode, so you're not, eating into the Pathfinder's slot, and then because you conditionally have to have uh, poison, and then the explode doesn't apply to um, your minions, you're not eating in too much into the occultist as well, right? Um, the alternative is that you could change the poison uh, nodes entirely into just either generic dots. Um, this would allow you to scale bleeding and poison together for the golden rule, which would then, still enable that. But then if you wanted to go like, let's say, a Reap Exsanguinate build or something similar, where you just do a physical dot, you also have that option. And then you can also utilize some of these generic dot multis that are on this side of the tree. Um, Another option would be to scale it have the assassin ascendancy scale with like a non-standard defensive layer, like a ward, for example. Ward goes underutilized. Basically, it would fix the issue of that the assassin has, which is sometimes, well, it wouldn't really fix that many issues because ward itself is another thing. But what it would allow you to do is use night grips more effectively, which would increase your chaos damage, which would benefit the archetype that exists already for the assassin, which is the infinite ward assassin that uses Cobra Lash. That would be a example, right? Um, again, uh, you don't have to take any of these suggestions. You can take some of them, you can take none of them, you can take all of them. Uh, I trust in your abilities as developers to improve the assassin class. Uh, if you've made it to the end of this video, I know it's going to be quite long. Again, I apologize. I'm not a content creator. I probably was a rough video to get through. But I sincerely hope, as a player and as someone who clicks on the Assassin Ascendancy every league and finds enjoyment in the game that you've created, as well as this uh, ascendancy and this class that you've created, I really hope that you will take some of this to heart and utilize it to change the state of this ascendancy for the better. Um, and again, just to reiterate one last time before I end the video, um, the issues with Assassin are the location on the tree, where it has a lot of anti-synergy with what the tree is trying to do, right? The other issue is that a lot of the nodes are locked behind multiple points, which is a cost investment to reach those nodes. Um, in order to get the full benefit of some nodes, you have to use a Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo. Then a lot of your defensive layers are not only are they conditional, they're also locked behind multiple points. And then the ones that aren't already are not real defensive layers because they have some sort of condition that causes them to have an entropic effect to where they will lose effectiveness over time, which means eventually you will be hit. And the issues with you as an assassin is that when you are hit, you die, which makes doing higher level content extremely difficult without extremely high investment um, into your class to either scale damage incredibly high, which has been entirely removed. So like a lot of the damage scaling has been entirely removed from the Ascendancy outside of like just getting some basic power. Um, or, saying that I'm just not going to spec into any defenses and I'm going to sacrifice my defenses to get just raw amounts of damage and then just hope I can kill everything fast enough to where I don't die. And in a game that is as punishing as Path of Exile, with the modifiers that you find on mobs, the degens on the floors, and things like that, it can become incredibly frustrating when you don't have access to those defenses to try to scale up a character. And this leads to opportunity costs both with inside the ascendancy, or the class shadow, and as well as other classes inside of the game. there are ways that you could fix it. One would be to try to make the identity of assassin holistic, because currently it is all over the place, where it's trying to scale spell crit, it's trying to scale power charges, it's trying to scale poison, it's trying to scale regular crit, and it's trying to, you know, have its all its eggs on one basket for defensive layer. Um, you could make these conditionals be less reliant on um, the enemy and more reliant on the conditions of the character itself, like low life, like constantly being at full life, or some other, similar mechanic, like you know, scaling your defenses with your crit chance, or scaling your defenses with your crit multi, or some other form or fashion, or maybe even just saying, as long as you're on low life, you get all these benefits, right? In a similar way that Pain Attunement works. It could be the build that is more life reliant compared to Trickster's energy shield reliance. It could be the build that says, I'm going to go both life and energy shield. Um, and you can give it some benefits that, normally require uniques to gain access to, like chevrons, like Ivory Tower, like the consecrating elixir. Um, and that's really it. Again, thank you for watching to the end of the video, and hopefully uh, this inspires you to look at Assassin in a different way to try to fix some of its issues.